Hello, 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 everybody. We're just going to give it a few minutes to make sure we're live on both Zoom and Facebook here. But welcome to Sundowning and your senior dog. So we'd love it while we're just waiting here. If you put in the chat box, have any of you ever experienced this with your dog? I actually have with a senior Akita named Sushi. So I would love to hear if anybody else has done this. And we're going to get started in just a moment. But we always like to do some of this fun stuff and learn about you guys while we're waiting to get started. And I see everybody starting to come into the room. So we're happy to have you. And I see there's a 12-year-old border collie that's currently experiencing Sundowners. And some of you, others of you, yes, a 14-year-old doggie. But it's so wonderful when we have our dogs up into these older years. It's just amazing to have them with us. So, hello and welcome. My name is Denise Fleck, and I'm the board president of the Gray Muzzle Organization. And we are all so excited right now because we're in the middle of grant review season. Applications are still coming in from shelters and rescues all over the country, and we just can't wait to dive in and start reviewing them so that we can help these shelters and rescues help senior dogs in their care. Last year, we gave out, listen to this number, just shy of $500,000 to 90 different rescues and shelters. So it is so exciting, because we always like to up the ante if we can. So we're just going to be so excited to see what applications come in, and we're really crossing paws and fingers that we have some really awesome applications so we can really fund a lot of senior dog programs. But today we're here to talk about sundowners, doggy dementia, canine cognitive dysfunction. It goes by different names, and it's actually a part of canine cognitive dysfunction, but it's basically an age-related disease that affects the brain. It affects all of us. I'm starting to feel it a little bit from time to time when I go to put the butter and the eggs in the pantry instead of the refrigerator, or walk into the room and don't know why I'm there. But with our dogs, it can be challenging for us to know how to help them. And it can also be challenging to our lifestyles if they're up and roaming around during the night and developing different behavior habits and all. But I think, like with so many things in life, the key is that early intervention to recognize those signs and to get the help that's needed. So that's why we're bringing to you today Helen St. Pierre. She runs her own senior and hospice sanctuary in New Hampshire, and she's going to share with us the signs and symptoms of sundowning. Also, what intervention we need to have so that we can pay attention and discuss with our veterinarian what are the best next steps, and strategies for you and for our older best friends so that we can manage it and keep them in the moment as long as we can. Helen is a certified behavior consultant. She's a dog trainer of 20 plus years and has a facility in Concord, New Hampshire. And she and her husband are very passionate advocates for senior care. She's been featured in magazines, on TV and radio for her work, and we're just delighted to have her here as part of our Gray Muzzle monthly webinar series, bringing you the 411 you need to know about your senior pet. So with that said, I'm going to hide myself and let Helen take over. But please put your questions into the chat box on Zoom or on Facebook, and we will get to them at the end of her presentation. Helen, take it away.
Thanks, Denise. Thank you so much. I'm really thrilled to be here. Oh God, there's a dog on the screen. That must be your Akita, Denise. Sushi, so cute. So thank you everybody for having me. Yep, as Denise said, my name is Helen St. Pierre, and I run a senior and hospice dog and other animal livestock, cats, parrots sanctuary here out of our home in New Hampshire. We currently have 19 senior and hospice dogs under in our care. And over the last year and a half, we've taken in over 130 senior and hospice dogs from all over the country, and help them have a good quality of life and also quality of death. So dementia, canine cognitive disorder, and dementia and sundowning is something, unfortunately, that we see very, very frequently. And what I wanted to do today was talk a little bit about some of the signs that we've seen when we've seen it either come on quite acutely or whether we've seen it develop slowly over time, and some of the interventions that we have definitely used, seen that have helped, and kind of give you guys some clues as to ways to hopefully mitigate it and questions to ask your veterinarians and all of that good stuff. So very informal today, guys. I will show you some slides and some images of some things that will help give some examples. But please feel free definitely to ask questions, and I will go over questions at the end of the talk today, especially for anything specific. So let's talk a little bit about what defines sundowning or canine cognitive dysfunction, because how do you know, what you're looking at? You know, for many people and for us, it will definitely display itself as potentially confusion, dogs that seem to get lost or potentially can move in circles or in a particular pattern. For other dogs, it can be an anxiety display where a dog that wasn't anxious prior is now displaying a lot of anxiety or distress. It can be in a shift in their function. So I define function in my senior dogs as their walking, their movement, their eating, their sleeping, you know, everything that we define as physical function that gets us through the day. And an interruption in function, for example, an interruption in their sleep cycles, can absolutely be a sign. An interruption in their activity level can absolutely be a sign in terms of a dog that used to relax a lot more is now pacing, or a dog that used to be more active is now no longer as active. But any interruption in their daily function is absolutely a sign as well, including their eating habits. Of course, things that are metabolically affecting that can absolutely be a part of that as well, but that's function, the interruption in function. And sometimes it can be a combination of all three. You might have a dog that is acting more confused, definitely seems to be waking up more at night, and then occasionally is getting lost, you know, in an environment that they have lived in. And when you start to see these things, when we start to see these things, you know, those are our little red flags that go, okay, you know, is this just a bad day for this dog, or are we potentially going down the road of some sundowning and dementia potentially? Now, it's called sundowning because definitely sometimes the evenings can be harder, although I've had many cases of dogs where the mornings tend to be harder for them, or cases where you know, it's the middle of the night. They're fine in the evening, they're fine during the day, it's the middle of the night. But sundowning can definitely be a classic sign of in the evening times. This is when my dog tends to struggle the most. And that honestly is partly, we think, due to the fact that our serotonin levels are at their lowest in the evening. So if our brain chemistry is challenged, you know, in the evenings, we might see that uptick of some cognitive dysfunction. So how do we mitigate it? How do we figure this out? Now, let's say you've had a conversation with your veterinarian and you have absolutely defined that what you are seeing is some beginning of cognitive decline. And what's important to understand is that, you know, the dog is not aware that they're going through this kind of cognitive decline, unlike as a personal example, my own family member who's going through some vascular dementia very mildly, I can say to her, this is what's happening, and sort of define it. She may not remember it long term. I might have to repeat it a few times, but I can absolutely say to a person, this is what's happening. I think something that causes a lot of our dogs anxiety during this as they start to lose basic function, like they can't walk upstairs the same way they used to or move on floors, that sort of increase of vulnerability and inability to do certain things, or they are forgetting things, can definitely uptick their anxiety and feeling of stress. So for me, one of the most important things that we do here at the sanctuary is we create an environment that is extremely predictable for the animal. And like I said, we have we have hospice horses, we have hospice goats, we have hospice pigs. But especially for our dogs, we try to create an environment that creates predictability for them, which means that there is a lot less for them to have to worry about. Now, this is in a home environment, when we're not talking about a sanctuary, means for many of us that we might have with our dogs prior to these dementia symptoms or this cognitive dysfunction stuff started. We've given our dogs free rein of the entire house. They have the yard, they have the whole house, they can come upstairs with us, they can do whatever they want. And what I found, and many clients have said that has made a huge difference, is making that ability to roam much smaller, giving the dog a much smaller, more comfortable space to exist in that doesn't result in them getting as lost, that creates a little bit more predictability and gives them freer access to things that they need, can make a very, very big difference. So an example of that, which I can show you in this here. Hold on, please. I'm going to find my image that I can share screen with. I'm going to show you what my space looks like currently. And hopefully this will work. Yay. Okay, perfect. Denise, can you see that okay for me? Just let me know if you can unmute so I can know that everyone else can see that image. So this is can you see it, Denise?
See it, Helen. I do see the next one's coming across the bottom, so I'm not sure if you have it in
That's okay.
slideshow.
Yeah, that's okay. I'll flip before, as long as people can see this, because this is my senior dog space this is the sanctuary itself. And what you can see here is that everything is laid out very comfortably for these older dogs. They have a huge, large space where they can pee and poop as needed. This right here is Mr. Petey, staring at me, probably waiting to go pee on something that he shouldn't. And they have access to food and water as much as they can, but they have a much smaller space than, let's say, an entire house. And the same thing goes for their outdoor area. Their outdoor area has a ramp that they can go down, and it's not a giant, large yard that they can get lost in. It's got a smaller space that they can navigate in, with some gravel, some easy stairs to go up and down, and some astroturf, and that's really it. And what ends up happening is we feel that the dog, oh, they'd like all of this space. But I've found that actually the smaller the space, as long as they still have access to move and navigate comfortably, can reduce for a lot of dogs that level of stress and anxiety. Now, a lot of dogs will need to be slowly acclimated to a smaller space. So a client recently who was experiencing cognitive dysfunction with her dog, we started to slowly decide that the dining room area would be the area where the dog would have most of their time during the day, so that the dog wasn't walking around the house pacing and urinating and vocalizing, which was what was starting to happen. So for a few days, we would put the dog in the dining room area, hang out, play music, make sure their food and water was there, and then give them back the access to the house. This isn't something that you can do sort of right off the bat, but definitely switching environments to being a little bit smaller and more predictable can make a very big difference. Now, adding on to that, as you saw in the image that I showed you of the inside, for any of you that might be just, having an issue with your dog that's going through dysfunction, where they are having problems with their elimination habits. Now, that can be a huge part of dementia, where the dog is no longer able or capable to hold their urine, to get outside. And that could partly just be due to old age. It could be part to disease, but it can absolutely be a part of dysfunction. Giving them a space in that area that you've designated, whether that's through pee pads or whatever, where they can feel that they can eliminate safely without shame or without worry, definitely decreases their level of anxiety. And we found that significantly here at the sanctuary, that, Is it ideal that the dogs pee and poop inside? No, but it's also part of aging. So we give them that ability so that we can reduce anxiety as much as we possibly can. So making the space smaller and giving the dogs access to anything that they need, whether that's a space to eliminate, whether that's their food and water sort of now free fed, and a space to rest as well. I am a very, very big fan of at the sanctuary having music playing. We really like to create a predictable, this is what happens during the day and this is what happens during the night. So what we do is we have a certain melody, a classic melody that plays in the senior sanctuary from the morning. So when we go in the morning, we change all the pee pads out, we fresh water, fresh food. Everybody has a chance to go outside if they want to, and we turn on a specific music player that plays a classical song throughout the day. Okay, it's just classical music and it's played and the same melody throughout the day. And then in the evenings, we go through the same routine of we turn off the lights, we do all of these things, and then we turn on a specific sound that we play throughout the evening. And it's a melody, it's a similar melody, but it's much slower and it's quieter and all the lights go down. And what we found with a lot of these dogs is that they literally can set their timer, their brain timer to, okay, it's daytime, this is what's happening, and then, okay, it's nighttime. And the more we can create that predictability for them, the better. And so that's definitely something that I've seen be very, very effective for a lot of these older dogs, is creating that environment and creating that kind of predictability. And sometimes because of dementia, they will be unpredictable, but that's completely and totally okay. But I do think that it's very important that we stay the course with that type of predictability. You have to remember that a lot of the dogs that come into our sanctuary are going through a huge transition, whether they have been surrendered from somebody that they've lived with for 15 years, that we just had that a dog dropped off last week that was lived with someone for 15 years. They can no longer take care of the dog because the dog is urinating, and so they've dropped the dog at our house. That dog is going through a huge transition. And transitions and stress can absolutely increase cognitive dysfunction symptoms because the animal is stressed. So by creating a predictability in the environment of this is what happens during the day, this is what happens during the night, here all the access to everything, it can make a very big difference. So now I'll talk a little bit about other interventions that we have tried and things that have worked for us and things that have not. And we'll talk first about what I call can't hurt, might help interventions. So one of which is a thunder shirt. I'm not sure if anyone has ever tried a thunder shirt or anything like that with their older dogs, or even not an older dog, but an anxious dog. But a tight t-shirt or a thunder shirt is something that can sometimes, for a lot of dogs, ease their anxiety and stress, similar to, the squeeze cages or even weighted blankets with people when they're anxious. That can really help. And we have seen with a couple of the cases of dogs that we've had that by putting, something like that on them, it absolutely can reduce their level of anxiety. Um, we found this out honestly quite by accident when we had a little dachshund named Fritzy who really struggled with a little bit of confusion. He was losing his eyesight. He was completely deaf. And in his first couple of weeks with us, he did a lot of sort of pacing, what we call mapping, where he was mapping the environment a lot, just sort of convincing himself that everything was okay and it was still predictable. And I said, you know what? It's kind of cold and he still wants to go outside. I'm just going to put a sweater on him. And I put a little sweater on Fritzy, this little dachshund, and he was covered in lumps and bumps. And as soon as I put that sweater on him, it was almost like you saw him go, oh, wow, that feels good. And he lay down on his bed and he took the nicest, longest nap. And it was kind of a wake up for me because, quite frankly, I'd only really ever used these tight t-shirts and things for sound sensitivity. I hadn't thought of using it for some cognitive decline or dogs that maybe be pacing or anything like that. And since we've used that on Fritzy, I've found it be extremely helpful for some of our other dogs that we do seem to see pacing. And it's definitely something that I would recommend thinking about implementing if you have a dog that's waking up in the middle of the night. So before you try any kind of psychopharmaceutical interventions or anything like that, you could absolutely say, what if I put you in a nice snug t-shirt in the evenings where you usually sleep? Does that help you feel more settled and less likely to get up and pace throughout the night? And again, we used it very recently again on a puggle who was waking up in the middle of the night and vocalizing, mostly during her transition period. And it definitely settled her. But we have absolutely had some of our oldies that we've put the t-shirt on and they've stared at us in the middle of the sanctuary like, why are you making this worse for me? Why are you putting me in a piece of clothing? But it's one of those can't hurt, might help. So definitely considering that. The other thing that we have seen that can be sometimes helpful for certain dogs is something called a DAP collar, or a dog appeasing pheromone. Dogs that lose their, we've had many dogs come in that have lost their sight or they've lost their hearing. And those dogs can be hard to know whether we're dealing with cognitive decline or whether we're dealing with a dog that is completely and totally disoriented and has no real way of knowing where they are or mapping or anything like that. And that can be a tough game for us to play. It's like, are we dealing with cognitive decline or are we dealing with just transitory reorientation and stress? And so we will try pheromone collars. Now, these pheromone collars have been used in shelter dogs. We see pheromone collars or plugins with cats. And the DAP collars that you can get, they look like flea collars. You just put them on and the dog wears them 24/7 for about 30 days, and then you reapply it. And the thing with the pheromone collars that we found is that we don't notice any massive significant change. You're not going to put this on and the dog will suddenly be a totally different dog. What you might notice, though, is a reduction in some of their stress behaviors, pacing or confusion or moving in certain directions, or circling or anything like that. But it's definitely one that is worth trying, and maybe even on top of like the Thundershirt, you could try that. For supplementation, something that we work closely with our veterinarians with is melatonin. I'm not sure if anybody here has ever tried melatonin with their senior dogs, but melatonin, especially for Sundowners, can be extremely effective and helpful. Most veterinarians will give you the recommended dosage. Some of the research that they've done at Tufts and at other places on melatonin has shown that sometimes dogs need up to 3 times the recommended dose to actually have it take effect. But I have found that melatonin supplements in the evenings have been really helpful for some of our early stage cognitive decline dogs, just to help them get through that evening period and get a really good night's sleep. There are other supplements out there like L-theanine, L-tryptophan, vitamin B, on top of the melatonin that you can absolutely try. Again, a lot of these supplements are sort of can't hurt, might help. And asking your veterinarian, all right, I'd like to try this stuff first. Let's see if this makes a difference. And mainly for this is I use these in the evenings to help with dogs that are struggling with their function and sleep cycle, because in my experience with cognitive dysfunction, when the sleep cycle starts to get interrupted, when the dog is pacing throughout the night, or that tends to snowball everything. If I can help the dog get a good night's sleep, I find that their cognitive dysfunction, even though it might still be apparent in a little bit of confusion and navigation throughout the day, is much less pronounced if the dog is getting a good night's sleep. So I'm always making sure that function in terms of their sleep is at my highest priority. So talking to your vet about those sort of supplements with melatonin is absolutely a good idea to think about implementing. The last one that I mention, and I mention it quietly, but it's important to talk about, is something called CBD. I'm not sure if anybody here has ever tried CBD. I'm waiting on more research for CBD. I recently had a case of a sanctuary dog where my veterinarian said, you know what, why don't we try it? He was blind. We'd had to have his eyes removed. And we were trying to see if this would help him. And we did some CBD for him in the evenings, and it absolutely calmed him down. But what we also found was that some of his dysfunction in his pacing was also due to pain. So we treated the pain, and the CBD at the same time really seemed to help calm him down. But I'm on the fence with some of that. I'm waiting for more research. It's not something that I haven't tried, but I absolutely have seen some success and mixed results. I mean, again, I think it's the same thing with a lot of these can't hurt, might help things. Thunder shirts, melatonin, CBD, DAP collars. These are all, let's try this first and see if this helps before we go to the other thing, which is what I'll talk about next. So the last thing that you would want to talk to your veterinarian about is actual prescription medications or even prescription diets that can help with cognitive dysfunction. What's incredible now is that, 15, 20 years ago, when dogs were dealing with cognitive dysfunction or anything like this, it was just sort of like, well, good luck. And now we have a ton more interventions, including things like neurocare, diets, and a lot of these really incredible advancements that are definitely worth discussing with your veterinarian. There are anti-anxiety supplements. There are supplements or anti-anxiety prescriptions. There are prescription uh, uh, diets. There are also over-the-counter diets that you can get, but you can have all of these conversations with your vet. And there have been some dogs that we have absolutely tried these medications for. And that, again, I'm not a veterinarian, so I have to tread lightly here in saying what to recommend or not, but I have seen some really, really good effects on certain dogs for what they've needed during those cognitive decline periods. My most troubling thing for cognitive decline, which many of you may be experiencing as well, is it's anxiety. I'm not as worried about a dog that is losing their, ability to hold their urine, or a dog that, needs to move a little bit differently or do some more mapping in their pacing, but they're not pacing due to severe anxiety. If the dog is cognitively dysfunction and they're super anxious and stressed and they're pacing in circles or they cannot settle or they're not sleeping, that I feel is a real predicament in terms of quality of life. So that is where I will absolutely step up and have conversations with my veterinarian about how do we relieve some of this anxiety. So the conversation that I'll have with the vet is, do we try some anti-anxiety medications? Do we try some other medications? And there are some dogs that we have tried things like some trazodone in the evening on top of melatonin, and that's made a huge difference. Some dogs that are already on pain medications like gabapentin, we try upping the gabapentin a little bit. Gabapentin can absolutely have some anti-anxiety attributes to it as well, so that can make a big difference. But again, it's all about having those conversations with your vet and saying, look, I've tried these things. I've made the environment smaller. I'm giving him a place to pee and poop. He now has free access to his food. I'm making things a little bit more predictable and easier for him to understand, but we're still really struggling here. Do we have any options for in the evenings at night when he gets really, really anxious? And again, those are great conversations to have with your vet to help them maybe help implement whatever kind of anti-anxiety or prescription medications you can find. In terms of diets, the Clear Mind diets, the NeuroCare diets that I've seen, it's very difficult for me to say because most of the dogs that come into my care are hospice dogs. They really don't have, I mean, the longest dog that we have stay with us is maximum usually a year. So I really couldn't say that the neurocare diets that we have tried with dogs have been the ones that have made the most significant difference in the dogs' lives. I think I would need more cases of dogs that have been on them for a longer period of time. But that's not to say that it's certainly not a good idea if you start to see your dog displaying some early signs of sundowning to get them on that diet and whether that would mitigate symptoms early on in life. But I think it's fantastic that there are so many options. And lastly, guys, before I open up to some questions, is remembering some things about remembering some things about, outside and exercise and fresh air and giving the dogs purpose and joy. You know, it's easy when our dogs get older that we, again, we sort of say, okay, well, you don't want to do this as much. You don't need to do this as much. And finding that balance of still allowing them to find that purpose and that joy in their life. And that helps me also read what their quality of life is as they're going through some forms of dementia. So, quality of life for me is the dog still enjoying their time? If I have a dog that might be displaying some dementia symptoms, but still loves to dig in the yard, I'm going to make sure as much as I possibly can that at least once a day, and it's nice out like it is today, that they get a chance to go out and dig and really give me a reading of, are you still finding your purpose? Are you still finding that joy in everyday life? A very recent case I had of a client whose dog was very much experiencing dementia. The dog really still wanted to go on a nice long walk every day. And, by going on that walk, their dementia symptoms were really reduced. It was the days that it was rainy and it was miserable and it was cold, and the client felt, oh, I can't take the old dog out because I don't want to hurt them. They were balancing the arthritis with the exercise. And once I said, well, look, do some more pain meds and take the dog on a little bit of a longer walk, the dog actually felt a lot less anxious and the dementia symptoms were a lot less. So it's really finding that balance. And the best piece of advice that I can give you, and something that we focus a lot on in our work here with the old dogs, is recording things. We try very, very carefully if we see a dog that's showing signs of some cognitive dysfunction, to make sure that we're recording what we're seeing and when we're seeing it. Okay, is it tend to be worse on really cold days? Is it better on certain days like this? If we give this pain medication, do we see less things? Because again, just like I've said, I've had some cases of dogs that were appearing to be anxious and cognitively declining. They were actually in pain. So writing some things down and recording it makes a big difference for you over the months, years that you see this progressing, and also helping keep your vet sort of in line. So, whew, I talked your ear off for a good half an hour. Denise, I would love to answer any questions that anybody has.
Well, we would love to give you some questions to answer. Helen, that was fascinating. And I mean, I know Cheryl chimed in with one of the things I was thinking too, that morning versus evening music was really an interesting thing to give them that predictability. But there's so many things here I want to go off and research, like the neurocare diet. But I think the most beautiful thing you said was about the purpose and joy, and really making sure we're giving that quality of life. So let me start here. Leah was mentioning that her older girl is really affected by sound effects, the
Mhm.
train, cows, rain. You've seen that before?
Yes, so we definitely see sound sensitivity can uptick tremendously in our older dogs. Now, there's still a lot of research on why that happens, and it could simply be that the little hairs that are in our ears that help us, that help with sound, just like as we age, there may not be that type of buffer anymore. So sounds can feel more pronounced. And then if you put in more dysfunction there and the dog not understanding it, so you can absolutely see an uptick in sound sensitivity in older dogs. And we've certainly seen that. And I've seen that in cases with clients as well. And I think the most important thing again there is potentially treating that as like a generalized anxiety. If you're seeing this where it begins to snowball, where at least at first it was just rain on the roof, and now it's if a car goes by or backfires or any of this. And then that's why one thing we do is we have a constant sounds going on in the old dog space. They do have something like a background white noise going on. And we found that that can be extremely effective for dogs with sound sensitivity, rather than them sort of feeling that they have this unpredictability.
That makes a lot of sense with the white noise. I know they're talking about that for us too. Let's see. Jessica has, I may paraphrase, she's got a nice long one here, but the pacing is horrible at night. He'll pace and pant and gets up 2 to 4 times to go outside. He's on gabapentin and clomicalm. Obviously, she doesn't want to medicate him more, but they're desperate for a solution because he paces and pants even during the day. And, that's not as much of an interruption, but when everybody's trying to sleep, it's hard. And he will not, he's a good boy here. He will not go to the bathroom inside. She actually wishes he would.
Yeah.
But he currently receives laser therapy twice weekly for arthritis and is on Medicam. Has degenerative you're going
Myopathy.
to have to get this one for me. Myelopathy
Yeah.
currently is still ambulatory, knuckling on both back feet often, and uses a help him up harness for some assistance. Regularly, he sees the vet, but I feel a little unheard with how bad the Sundowning CCD is. So, any tips? And there's one other thing in there, which, we all sort of hate to ask, but how severe is, what's going on in their heads because of this behavior? Is there a point with Sundowning that, it should be time to let our pups go?
I think that's such a great question. I think that, when function becomes interrupted 24 hours out of the day. So let's say I'm having a dog that has ambulatory issues during the day, right? Which to me is you've got the help them up harness, you have the ramps that you can take them down, you have all of the things that you're doing, but they're still sleeping well, right? Like as long as they're sleeping well, their diet is good, the other functions are there. When you start to have an interruption in sleep, in function in terms of their movements, in function in terms of their ability to go to the bathroom, like when other functions are also becoming interrupted as well. And then you can also look at like their general anxiety, if you've got pacing and anxiety there. Those are definitely the questions that you ask in terms of like quality of life, and it's such a difficult conversation to have, because they will have moments of lucidness. They will have moments where they are the dog that they were right before, and you're like, oh, there you are. But when you start to look at, are multiple functions being interrupted, and is the dog truly happy in what their function is, then we have those discussions. I think what's important to remember in talking with your veterinarian is it's okay to try a lot of these can't hurt, might help things like a thunder shirt. It's okay to add in potentially some melatonin and try those things for a few days or a week. And then what makes me feel better in my own decision making is then I can say, I have done all those things. I have added and I have eliminated as many of these what ifs as I possibly can. And if the dog is clearly saying to me, thank you for all those tries, but I'm all set, I'm ready, then I go through the process of saying goodbye. And it's never easy, but definitely trying some of these can't hurt might help. Having a discussion with the vet saying, yeah, we're on these things, but is there anything else I can try to see if I can mitigate this? And then go from there. And something I do want to mention here with cognitive dysfunction, and an answer to that question before I go to the next question, is that you can sometimes feel like you're playing whack-a-mole. You will fix one area of the cognitive decline. Let's say you fix the sleeping, the dog sleeps through the night, but then the next day you find them staring and standing in a corner and they've gotten lost, right? Which they prior weren't doing before. When the brain is starting to go through degenerative changes, we have to remember that, on as much as we love our dogs, life is, we all, death is the great equalizer, right? So if you feel that you are playing whack-a-mole and you're getting to a point where you're like, I'm putting out one fire just for another fire to come up somewhere else, then that's where, again, having those quality of life discussions is really, really important, with everybody, because I do think that has happened to us too here at the sanctuary. We fix one area and then the dog isn't, and that's where the dog's saying to us in many ways, I'm ready. I'm trying to tell you something and I need you guys to hear me out. So great question.
I think you explained that beautifully, and we do have to tune in and listen. None of us want to say goodbye, and some of us have gone through that so many times. But there are times when that is the great gift we can give our pets, to send them on to their next chapter. So many exciting comments here and questions, Helen. A lot of people are saying things like nose work and walking really does seem to help. So it's all in your purpose and joy there. Have you heard of, or do you have any opinion on Life? We've got a
Yes.
few questions about that one.
Yes, I've had some really good feedback on Life with certain cases. Again, a lot of the dogs that I have are in hospice care. They're not long-term cases of like, where, like, again, my average months is like 4 to 6 months here at the sanctuary. So when we treat cognitive decline, we're almost always treating cognitive decline on top of another form of a disease, whether that is cancer or diabetes, major arthritis, liver failure, anything like that. So it's hard for me to say what's balanced on some of that. But yes, I have had clients, and a lot of my veterinarians really speak very highly of that. It's just another great intervention to have.
Great. And we've also got questions about brand of melatonin, and also I'm going to lump these together, in CBD. One lady recommends Pet Relief. And I know with the CBD, it's kind of a tricky scenario, because in some places your vet can't say anything. It's
Yes.
taboo. Sometimes if you ask the vet can then, engage in a conversation. But I don't know if you've heard of that one, Pet Relief CBD, and if you have any thoughts on types of melatonin.
So most melatonin you can get at pretty much any pharmacy. It's the 3 milligram tablets. You can ask your veterinarian of what, you don't have to get dog versions of melatonin. There are some supplements that have melatonin built into it. So Nature Vet has a supplement called Quiet Moments with melatonin, and that's got L-theanine, tryptophan, melatonin all sort of in it. But if you just want to try melatonin, some of the dogs that we've had that we've tried that with, you can just get it at most pharmacies or natural food stores. You can get these milligrams of the melatonin. You can basically ask your veterinarian, what do I start with? Do I start with 3 tablets of 3 milligrams? Do I start with 1? And then again, that's where writing it down can be very helpful. When it comes to CBD, you're completely right, Denise. There are some vets that are like, nope, I don't want to talk about it. I don't have enough research on it. No, none of that. And then again, I have some vets that are like, Helen, we can try it. Let's do it. When I go through CBD, I use local sources where I know what I'm getting. I usually only use the oil. There's a wonderful company here in New Hampshire called Clearly Better Days, or CBD. And it's a very reliable local sourced product that I know what I'm getting. And then there's also some really wonderful natural food stores here, and natural pet food stores where you can actually purchase, good quality CBD oil. And I like that because it's the droppers. And then I literally make a little volcano of peanut butter and I give it to the dog that way. But unfortunately, because of the boom in CBD and hemp and all of that stuff, there's a lot of products on the shelves that I wouldn't necessarily trust, let's just put it that way. So if you're going to try something like that, I would definitely get it from a reliable source and not on Amazon. There are certain things that's great for, but for that sort of thing, it's like go to an actual reliable source.
Makes perfect sense, just like we would for ourselves, hopefully.
Exactly.
Christy's asking if you have any experience with a drug called Anapril. She recently read an article suggesting it shows good results for dogs with Sundowners, so she's curious.
Yes, I actually was just talking to a veterinarian recently about Anapril. And again, I'm kind of one of those like, all right, show me more data. Let's see, what we see. But yes, I mean, it's really interesting, some of the research that they're finding on even some of these diets, and what is actually happening in the brain when we're dealing with cognitive dysfunction. Because like I was saying, Denise, a lot of we find that some cognitive dysfunction, some of the symptoms of cognitive dysfunction can be the same as the symptoms of significant or chronic pain. So what we're finding is things like Anapril can be really effective, but Yes, I've heard of it. I'm just waiting on more research.
Terrific. Well, I've got quite a few more, but let me
Go
ask
ahead.
our fabulous executive director, Lisa Lunghofer, who's monitoring Facebook, if there are any coming in over there.
Nope, nothing here.
Okay, well, everybody's zeroed in here, so let me keep going then. Out of curiosity, says Melanie, can sundowners dementia affect younger dogs, or is it really most common in the seniors?
That's a great question. And yes, we have had a few hospice puppies and younger dogs. Now, one such puppy that we had, I call her puppy, she was 9 months old, but she was unfortunately just from a very bad breeding situation and had was in renal failure, had lots of kidney failure, lots of major organ issues due to being probably inbred and from a hoarding situation. And she was classified as a hospice puppy. So, of course, she was given to us. And she displayed many signs of cognitive dysfunction, confusion, walking in circles, pacing. And really, I believe that a lot of that had to do with the fact that her organs were not functioning properly, which were not potentially feeding her brain properly. So absolutely, yes, to answer your question. I've seen it in younger dogs. But for younger dogs, it tends to be more a secondary part to some kind of disease, not necessarily just, the brain sort of deteriorating because of age. Cognitive dysfunction can be its own separate thing. You can have and these are the hardest cases, quite frankly, when you have a completely otherwise physically healthy older dog, a 13-year-old dog who has barely any arthritis, no other issues, but their brain is dying, versus a dog that has cognitive dysfunction on top of other disease, or a young dog that has that as a result of some of their disease. Again, things like seizure disorders that we can see some other signs of cognitive issues.
Boy, that's really a bad card for those dogs to have been dealt, early in
Yeah.
their life. Well, this one I want to chime in and say yes, but I'm going to let you answer it. Could increased separation anxiety and newfound clinginess be signs of sundowning?
Absolutely. Yes. Separation anxiety, excess vocalization, all of that stuff is a great sign, or not a great sign, but a classic sign of some sundowning and cognitive dysfunction. And what we have to remember is it's the dog is going through some kind of mental shift. I mean, I'm not going to pretend that I know what they're going through, but they're going through some kind of shift where they've literally forgetting, or they're not as familiar with the what you're used to being familiar with. So in the past, you leaving and coming back was okay, and now it's I feel lost. I don't know where you are, and I'm looking for you. So that absolutely can be a sign of that. And that's where we got to do some interventions as soon as we can. Many people surrender their old dogs to us because of increased separation anxiety and vocalization, and they can't deal with it at their landlord says get the dog out or anything like that. So we see that a lot.
Wow. Let's see. Sarah's asking, her dog Ruby started with a diagnosis of Cushing's and was on medication, Veteril, for a couple of years before her symptoms became more extreme. We tried a couple of different treatments, such as CBD and a prescription from the vet. The severity of her pacing sadly became a question of quality of life. Do you feel that Cushing's may have had a bearing on her dementia?
Well, any metabolic disease, right? Cushing's, I mean, we don't have enough research yet. I mean, Dr. Amy Barton's doing some of this stuff now too that shows that, the brain and the gut and our metabolic systems, the way that we process food, the way that we filter the blood, all of that affects our brain, okay? Because it's all chemicals that we're utilizing or not utilizing. And so to answer your question, could Cushing's affect cognitive decline? I'm sure it could, but I think it's also dependent on the dog. There are some dogs, like we have a dog in our sanctuary right now, Coffee. She is serious Cushing. She's got a huge the typical Cushing's belly. But cognitively, she's great. She's sharp as a tack. But I think it's really just the genetic roll of the dice in terms of does this expedite cognitive decline sometimes, or can Cushing's cause discomfort that will then cause pacing that can then be, looked at as if it's cognitive decline, but it's actually discomfort mixed in with a little bit of that. So I think it would be, it would be ignorant of me to assume that that these things are all separate from each other. I think that they absolutely can overlap, and that's certainly my experience, is that they do overlap and sometimes they're separate.
Yeah, well, like we're learning in so many arenas that, looking at the whole, because one thing does affect another. All right, one more here, and I don't know if you're going to do this. I know you're up in the Northeast, but you're not as far as Canada, but we're looking for CBD brands available in Canada.
Oh,
I don't know if you would know that. I see the question out to the group, but no one seems to have a response.
I don't know. I mean, I love the company Clearly Better Days. So if you contact Clearly Better Days, they may be one that they will know of other companies that they are as reputable, but Clearly Better Days, I know, and I think they ship. I'm not sure if they ship to Canada, but Clearly Better Days is my go-to, so they would be a good one.
Okay, good. That's great advice. Well, I think, we just learned a world of knowledge here from you today, and your experience is just so helpful to all of us that there's quite a few going through it, or many of us, actually, I don't want to say we hope to go through it, but we hope our pets get into those senior years. So this will be very important for everybody to look at and see what they can do to help. But, notice those signs, and intervention with your vet is so, so important. Find a vet that you have the utmost confidence in and that can talk with you, and really, be a partner with them for the sake of your pet. Thank you so much.
One last thing, Denise, to mention to people there is, if you have a vet that you can, with cognitive issues, you will not often see cognitive issues in a vet exam. So work with a vet who is okay with you videotaping what you're seeing and texting or emailing it to them so they can see what you're describing. That can be really, really helpful for vets to see.
That's so important. And we all have these little cell phones by our sides now. The first dog I had that had reverse sneezing, and I didn't know what it was 100 years ago. I didn't have a cell phone. So of course, by the time I'd grab a camera or something, he would stop. But now we've got these. So, capture those behaviors and share with a vet. But everybody is thanking you so much for your experience, and even thanking you from a 13-year-old coonhound. So
wonderful.
We appreciate it, Helen. And I just want to remind everybody that actually next Tuesday, the 19th, we have a webinar on cardiology with Dr. Blake Bakar. So, stay tuned for future webinars. Thank you for supporting Gray Muzzle. And if in your area you have a nonprofit rescue or a shelter that does help senior dogs, let them know about our grant program. They have until March 19th to get in their application. And gosh, I don't know if it was a senior moment or just a slip of a tongue, but you know how your brain goes back and thinks about things you said. And I was so excited to say last year we gave out just shy of $500,000. I meant shy of $1 million. We gave out something like $848,000. So I had to correct myself there, whether it was a senior moment or a slip of the tongue, we won't debate. But thank you everybody for joining in, and we'll catch you next time. But always visit our website. We've actually have a new website up there. So if you haven't been there for a while, please check out greymuzzle.org, Grey, Gray, and let us know what you think. Take care and give belly rubs to all of your pups from me. Bye-bye.